we go.
That explains something.
Hello and welcome everyone. I am Kirsten, the workshop coordinator here at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts, and I will be helping out tonight with technical support during the artist talk. Before we begin, I'd just like to familiarize you with Zoom. If you look to the upper right corner of your screen, you'll see text that says either speaker view or gallery view. This is a toggle button to allow you to change the view. The gallery view will show each presenter in their own equal-sized Brady Bunch style window. Switching to the speaker view will show the person speaking in a larger window with the other participants off to the side. You may pin the window you wish to focus on by clicking the three dots in the upper left-hand corner and choosing Pin Video. During the artist talk, we'll be using the spotlight feature, which will feature the presenting artist for everyone as the main view. In the lower left corner of your screen, you'll see the microphone and camera icons. We just ask that everyone keeps their microphone and camera off tonight so that we get the most out of our bandwidth. We'll be asking that you put questions throughout the talk and during the Q&A in the chat, and we'll be reading your questions from there. As a note, MCBA staff may be muting your audio and your camera if they are on and there's any unexpected background noise. So no worries, if you need help doing that, we can take care of that for you. Next, I want to point out the chat feature. Clicking on the icon that looks like a thought bubble at the bottom of your screen will display a sidebar that will allow you to view and send chat messages. You can type your message at the bottom of the screen and choose if you want your message sent to the entire group or to an individual. I'll be posting my contact information there in just a moment. You can contact me if you need any help with technical support. You may email me at workshops@mnbookarts.org, or you may reach me on my cell phone at 646-269-7829 if you need any assistance. If you're using a mobile device tonight, you may need to click on your screen or select more to find the chat screen. If you'd like to change your name and how it's displayed in your window, hover over your image and select the three dot icon, then select rename, and you can type your name as you would like it to appear. If you're unable to locate this feature, just let me know and I can update that for you. You can send me a message through the chat for that. I want to acknowledge that this activity is made possible by a grant provided by the Minnesota State Arts Board through an appropriation by the Minnesota State Legislature and a grant from the National Endowment of the Arts. Without further delay, I'm happy to introduce the Minnesota Center for Book Arts host, Annika Schneider, Director of Exhibitions and Artist Programs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining tonight. My name is Annika Schneider, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Exhibitions and Artist Programs at Minnesota Center for Book Arts. Minnesota Center for Book Arts is a nonprofit arts organization focused on the book. We provide youth and adult workshops in papermaking, letterpress printing, screen printing, bookbinding, paper marbling, and book-related arts. Our programs span from exhibitions, visiting artist talks, fellowships, mentorships, an artist collective membership program, and an artist consignment program in our shop, educational programs, and artist residencies. Since 1985, MCBA has partnered with the Jerome Foundation to help early career artists expand the boundaries of contemporary book arts by supporting the creation of new artwork. Through 15 series of fellowships and 7 series of mentorships, this program has served Minnesota artists in a variety of disciplines, including printmaking, papermaking, bookbinding, painting, sculpture, poetry, filmmaking, and more. We would like to thank the Jerome Foundation and specifically to Eleanor Savage for all of their support. This cohort has made an amazing amount of work and really dedicated themselves to exploring new mediums and skills, all while balancing roles as educators. Nicole, Brooks, and Leah will be exhibiting their work in the main gallery at MCBA from November 1st, 2022 to January 8th, 2023. We hope that you will join us in the gallery to continue to support these amazing residents in the fall. Before we get started, I would like to welcome participants to include any questions they may have in the chat for the Q&A after all of the presentations of the residents' artwork. We will be monitoring the chat, so please enter your questions into the chat or send it directly to me, and we will get to them at the end. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Nicole Soley. Nicole utilizes contemporary and traditional printmaking processes to create dynamic multi-process prints. By creating cut-out printed paper objects, she synthesizes lived experience and research. And now for Nicole's portion of tonight's Artist Talks.
Okay, hi, sorry everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Nicole, it looks great.
Okay, thank you. Hello and welcome. First, I would like to start by thanking the Jerome Foundation for their support. I would also like to thank the Minnesota Center for Book Arts for facilitating this opportunity for growth in my practice. And I would love to thank specifically Annika for being our Fearless Program Coordinator. And lastly, I'd like to thank Brooks and Leah for embarking on this residency together. Okay, my apologies. I'm having some screen sharing difficulties. One moment. I'm not used to Zoom, even through all this virtual teaching that we've done over the last couple of years. Okay. Now I can see what you're saying. Okay, thank you for your patience. So today's talk will focus around the following objectives: background and past work specifically related to pop-up narratives, collecting some nostalgia and some work centered around childhood memory as it relates to the residency, and of course the Jerome Residency project, including goals and process, progress and mock-ups, and next steps. So just a little bit of background about me. I was fortunate enough to study art education at the Minnesota State University Mankato. When I started there as an art ed major, I thought I would be a painter, and I was fully committed to a painting concentration. But then I ended up taking a required printmaking course that changed my life. Josh Winkler introduced us at Mankato to endless possibilities of print, and I was hooked from then on. My concentration began or became printmaking very quickly, and I haven't been able to shake it since. Printmaking is a dynamic art making process in which you can create original multiples fairly efficiently. The multiple then is well suited to exhibition in multiple spaces, homes, gallery spaces, creating installations, and experimentation with printed surfaces. The process lends itself well to drawing in various styles and various mark making techniques which build up the layered surface. So here on this slide, I just have a few process images from some of my more recent processes. On the left, you can see drawn positives for creating screen prints. You can use a variety of different drawing materials. For example, in this picture, some Zig opaquing pens, Stabilo pencil, and you can really capture a wide range of drawerly aesthetics in the work. In the center here, you can see how the drawn layer translates into a printed inked layer. So you can see using the squeegee to be able to push the ink through the screen stencil to create fairly quick prints. And then on the right, you can see Holograph Objects, which is a process that's similar to Intaglio for those who are familiar, but they're printed from a mat board matrix and inked up before using a printing press. So printed where you're applying ink directly to the Holograph surface. And I'll talk a little bit more about those processes later on in the talk. But just to show the wide range and diversity of aesthetics in printmaking, here is a relief carving. And you can see that I'm really able to work in a variety of mark making through the woodcut form, through relief printing. And you can see that I'm exploring a bold graphic line and how the world of printmaking is offering many different methods of making, each resulting in different aesthetics. And hopefully it'll move to the next slide for me without making us watch this again. Here we go. Okay. So here you can see that I started to experiment with the pop-up form while I was making art in undergrad. So I was able to start to explore this process through a grant which I received while I was in undergrad, and I started to make sculptural 3D printed objects. So in this case, I was working in photolitho, which is a different process entirely, a little bit more extensive, a process that I haven't had as much time for since becoming a teacher. But you can see that I'm again layering color, layering imagery, and then structuring in a three-dimensional form. From there, I was able to explore how prints would maybe exist on their own as pop-up objects. So at the time, I was making some really research-driven work, some very research-intensive artwork, such as this piece here called The Perfect Birth Experience. And this was a project that I started to make when I watched a documentary called The Business of Being Born. And I was just a little uneasy about how the medicalization of birth was portrayed in that documentary. And I thought it would be interesting to create this pop-up interactive game. And this was actually a print assignment in undergrad. So it was introducing us all to the idea that print could be a three-dimensional form. And so this game was the result of that. And I kind of liked the way that it changed how the viewer related to the image and how the viewer related to the work. In this case, being able to potentially play this game, maybe perhaps for something that shouldn't be made into a game in the first place. So then upon graduating from undergrad, I applied for and received a studio internship at Highpoint Center for Printmaking in Minneapolis. I'm thankful to be able to continue to build skills in a cooperative setting here and gain experience in a professional setting under the leadership and guidance of many great Highpoint staff, including Cole, Josh, Zach, and Megan, as well as Carla, who has also supported many of my former students with field trips to experience printmaking for the first time. The knowledge in the co-op and being a part of an artistic community, having access to resources such as presses, equipment, and gallery space and shows have been instrumental in my artistic development. I'm incredibly thankful to be a part of it and to live in a state where, and a metro area where access to the arts is supported. I truly would not be the artist I am today without having access to some of these places. So through taking classes at Highpoint, my direction of my work has changed from maybe a more political research-based foundation in undergrad to a more personal process. So over the next few slides, you'll see kind of how that transition takes place. Here you can see a toner transfer lithograph, which is another form of lithography where you're creating images on the stone and using a chemical process to create prints. And this was a class that I took where I was able to explore some nostalgia. Oh, okay. I'm not sure where I left off, but I'll summarize. This print was created in a class offered through Highpoint, and taking some of these classes helped change and shift the direction of my work. And you can see here, I start to use some nostalgic imagery from my childhood. So you can see this image here of a hot air balloon landing near where we grew up, where we lived when I was a kid. And these hot air balloons landing, I have these vivid memories of hot air balloons landing, sometimes even in the neighbor's yard. On the right, you can see a calendar image. And these were some sequined calendars that my mom and my grandma would make. And so I'm starting to combine reference images from childhood with some maybe photoshopped collaged imagery in this process, and then finishing it off with watercolor. Another class I took at Highpoint that was really influential to me was this Collagraph class through or taught by Mike Marks. And this helped me to work in a fairly cost-effective alternative to Intaglio. And again, Collagraph, you're creating these images out of mat board, so you're able to create a plate or a matrix, a printing surface fairly cheaply, and then ink it up using tarlatan and ink just like you would with Intaglio. And then you're able to get these really rich, expressive images based off of that process and using line work and removing parts of the plate and adding parts of the plate on. So I was really influenced by this process, and I started to create work surrounding these Collagraph images. In this case, this is a piece comparing mine and my mom's first commute out of school. My mom went to a 2-year tech school and I went to a 4-year college, and we both ended up having a similar commute from River Falls, Wisconsin to Minneapolis. For her, it was working at the Pillsbury Company. For me, it was working at Highpoint as an intern at the time. So just comparing those journeys. So you can see a shift in my work again from political to personal. This print, I would say, is maybe one of the more personal works that I've made. This print is a finished woodcut from the earlier carving process that you saw, and it explores my personal experience and reflections. It's really a graphic realization of some domestic crises we've faced since birth, and it's something that helped me process and really realize the losses compounded by the pandemic. And then I do have a video here of me pulling the print at Highpoint. And just to show, so you can work really large again with woodcut, in this case working fairly large on the press at Highpoint. You can also spoon rub relief imagery, but in this case I'm using the press, just to give a sense of scale. And this print I called American Bride. And you can see in the work itself, as I bring it closer to the camera, there's several references peppered in there, especially from recent events. So then you can see in my work more of a shift again. I'm starting to collect nostalgic imagery, starting to create more introspective work relating to my family. And you'll notice themes in my earlier art making that I'm about to share that are going to contribute to this current residency. So starting to think about these themes in terms of my family and nostalgia. So here I start to think about aesthetics of family celebrations for the 4th of July. So one thing I started to think about and remember from those experiences was a Coleman Polylight cooler. I felt like there was always a cooler around when we had these family celebrations where family members would sit in lawn chairs and we would all spend time together. So I decided to make a print surrounding this aesthetic, or this idea of the Coleman Polylight cooler. So this was a mini pop-up screen print that I made surrounding the nostalgia that this item held for me. I'm exploring this idea of an object as a status symbol or as a symbol of culture. And then furthermore, taking the experiment in a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional print and then exploring in a larger setting, in this case, an install. So I started to oscillate back and forth between these two sizes, a very small mock-up and then creating an installation which relates to that. So in this case, I'm again screen printing and working on various different surfaces to create this finished install setting, connecting back to the nostalgia experienced when I was a kid in childhood. So here my grandparents are sitting on the chairs, they decided to come to the opening, and that was very special for me, and they agreed that they could sit in these chairs for the entire opening. So they became a part of this almost performance artwork. So that was a special moment for me. So then I started to explore imagery surrounding my mom. Hi, Mom. And I created this print surrounding the idea of my mom always doing chores or working very hard to keep the house up when we were kids. We had a house that my mom and dad built, and we had a giant yard, and my mom was, as a single mom, really busy with yard work and cleaning and just all the things that go into managing a house. And she did it largely by herself with some help from us kids. And I wanted to create a print that explored that. So this print is a two-sided screen print with many layers that I stuffed and stitched. And it's kind of, for me, empowering to be able to explore some of these ideas in a third dimension, as opposed to on a flat paper surface. So taking something flat and, again, exploring in the pop-up. And this video, my sister sent in a group text one day. Hi, Val, if you're here. And I know Nate's seen this video too, my brother Nate too, I think too as well. And this is my mom shoveling snow. And when I saw this video, I knew that I had to make a print of this. So there's my mom shoveling snow. So a couple of prints surrounding that idea. And these prints start to get a little bit more abstract for me, not in terms of content, but in terms of the way that I'm interpreting it. It felt kind of refreshing for me to move from political work to maybe this more open concept of symbolic imagery and nostalgia to me. Here is an image of my mom's famous pickle wraps. I'm sure several of us who live in the Midwest or in the North have experienced these at a family gathering. And you can see the comparison image from the reference to the finished print. This was a photo lithograph. Took me a while to finish. It's on a larger scale as well. Working in memory and working in symbolic foods. So then I start working Holograph again, and I'm working on creating nostalgic images. And I started to realize that these images for me were actually representative of experiencing divorce as a kid, and maybe images or symbols that were representative to me of one household or the other. So in this case, the old lawnmower, our childhood couch, my mom's bread maker, and these are all in the Holograph again. So making these plates, cutting into them, inking them like intaglios, and printing them using a press. And lastly, but certainly not least, tuna casserole or hot dish. So these images feed into the proposal that I created for this residency. So this is my main focus in my artistic practice today, is this residency. And I'll talk about the project and those goals. You can maybe sense where I'm going already. But first, again, I would just like to state that I'm very thankful to have been embraced by the MCBA community. There's just such a plethora of resources here for artists to be able to access and create work. And here I've been taking so many classes and workshops, learning new skills applicable to this residency. And I'll just walk you through a couple of these classes that I've just completed. So I'm really excited to take the knowledge I've learned and be able to now translate it into production. Thanks to Karen Hamer, I've learned how to make hand-bound books, both in the drum leaf and sewn boards method. So this book that you see here was made using the sewn boards method through that virtual course. Here you can see starting to learn letterpress. This was for letterpress 1. I've been able to, thanks to Erin Morelli, I've been able to complete letterpress 1 through 4, which is very exciting. So learning everything from typesetting to registering to editioning. And again, just very excited to be able to translate these skills into the project, which I'll speak about shortly. And for those of you who aren't familiar with letterpress, I just thought it would be helpful to include this video of me learning how to use letterpress during class. So again, making multiples, being able to ink up a press and run a large edition fairly efficiently. Which brings us to the residency project that I will talk about today. This is the title that I have for now. I don't know that this title will stick all the way through. It's a little bit difficult for me to name something that isn't quite finished yet, that's still very much in production mode. So this name may change, but I thought this was a good start for the purpose of this talk. So I'm creating some screen printed letterpress pop-up books that explore my own personal experience of childhood during my parents' divorce. So again, creating a series, I'd like to make 4 screen printed pop-up books, and I'll show you some mock-ups here shortly, featuring letterpress covers and exploring that experience. One of my goals here with this as well is to just translate that and be able to have outside audiences experience through what I'm sharing, maybe some similar memories or a similar experience. So using the personal to share something that might be universal or common. They will be hand assembled and hand bound using the drum leaf binding technique, and I hope to distribute to audiences in gallery and museum or library collections. I'm creating a series of 4 handmade books, including these titles. So the Chaska McDonald's, Time in the Car, One Time at Mom's, and Walks by the Kinney. Each book is going to explore nostalgic memories of my childhood, centered around some characteristic experiences of my parents' forced parenting arrangement. And I am thinking about making this into a boxed set. So here I'll talk briefly about each book thematically and give glimpses of the work in progress. I do like to have elements of surprise in my work, however, so hopefully I can get you excited while still enticing you to come to the opening in the fall. I don't want to give too much away. I'd love to see your surprised faces when you're opening the books in person. So starting out, when I was working in initial research and development for the residency, the first idea I had for the pop-up book was centered around this idea of the Chaska McDonald's, which those of us who grew up in divorced parent households where maybe both parents were involved, there is usually some sort of meeting point, halfway point to exchange households, exchange kids, or in my case, exchange parents for the weekend. So I have memories of eating there as a kid, but mostly just, this like parking lot check-in point of like switching cars and going from household to household. And this is a photo that I did take of the actual Chaska McDonald's myself. I was on my way there and ended up taking this picture in college. And I knew I would maybe use it for a print later someday. So some memories of eating there. And I decided to create a spread that I felt would represent that, but also help me talk about the process so that you guys can see the process for creating each of these spreads. So this is the mock-up version, and I'll show how I developed that into a screen printed, almost fully realized spread. So a lot of my research and development has been researching pop-up books and structures and creating experimental structures surrounding that. And this is what you see here is a mock-up that I then use for creating positives. So again, in screen printing, you're breaking everything down via layering, and you're able to break things down into color layers and then print. So here we have the red layer in the top left corner, the yellow layer in the top right, and then the brown layer on the bottom. So trying to balance all of the colors I want to use with the colors that are actually feasible for the project, in this case, 3 colors. And I'm also thinking about fronts and backs, which adds another layer of complexity to this project. Here you can see the screen printing process broken down into a few phases. So on the left, you can see in the dark room, putting the positives underneath the screen, which has photo emulsion on it. essentially, which is light sensitive. When you expose the image, the photo emulsion hardens everywhere where the light can pass through. So you can use various opaquing materials to create your stencil. The top image, you can see sort of in progress, the actual printing. You can see that red ink and where it passes through the stencil. And the bottom right, you can see the prints on the rack after printing some of the mock-ups that I then used for experimenting. So after printing, I'm able to then take the actual prints themselves, make any adjustments, make any changes I need. In this case, I am making a few adjustments to the fold lines, or in this case, realizing that I need some fold lines to be able to assemble these easily on a large scale. So it's a nice way of being able to create and then take apart and make adjustments and then make changes to the positives. Here is a fully realized printed spread of this pop-up. Hopefully it'll let me transition slides here. Okay, here we go. So The Long Drive. This book I wanted to center around the time spent in the car going from place to place. In this case, the book centers around the experience of driving to my dad's. And there were specific things that I did in the car to occupy my time. My dad was really good about supplying us with things for our hobbies in the car. So I remember vividly an orange lap desk and storing things in the seat back pocket to do, and sketchbooks and colored pencils. So again, without giving too much away, here's a mock-up of one of the spreads from this book that will be developed into a screen printed interactive object. So these were the actual, or reminiscent of the actual headphones that I had as a kid. And then I made my first Vovell here, which changes from a Britney Spears CD to a very Best of Cher CD, because that was what I listened to. Walks by the Kinney centers around the experience of my dad sometimes coming to visit in River Falls and spending time with us in town, which is where our childhood home was, or kind of out in the country near River Falls. And we would go on walks by the Kinnickinnick River and sometimes go swimming. I'm really excited about this spread. It's actually going to be 3 spreads, but the final spread you'll see is one of the ones that I'm most excited about as a pop-up. And again, I'm just showing you the mock-up form, but I think this book as 3 spreads is really powerful as it is, and I can't wait to realize it as a screen print. And I'll just read with it. So Walks by the Kinney. Sometimes when my dad came to River Falls to visit, he would take us on a walk down by the Kinney. The walks were nice, but not my favorite part. My favorite part was stick racing and eating freezies. So you can see with this specific pop-up, there's a lot going on in one, but I'm really excited to experiment with different paper surfaces and explore all of these different ways of creating pop-ups for this final spread of this book. And then lastly, my last book of the series, One Time at Mom's. This book I found that I was exploring memories with really good supportive imagery or reference imagery, and often these images centered around play and wonder, which I thought was kind of interesting. So here you can see on the left, I'm holding this recycled rocket sculpture that I'm really excited about, and I wanted to make a spread involving this image. So here is the mock-up pop-up. It says, one time at Mom's, I got to build a rocket out of trash. So that one I think is going to be really nice as a screen print. Here is an image of my sister and I playing video games. In this case, a Nintendo. Here's the pop-up interpretation of that. It was even hard. I was like, oh, I don't know if I should include these because I don't want to give too much away. You'll have to see the finished ones. And then for this image specifically, I really like to think about how as a kid, maybe there were dynamics of control. Maybe I felt like I had control or I didn't. Experiencing that household growing up, just, you know, not knowing or experiencing that uncertainty of the divorce. So I love this image because it brings me so much joy, but at the same time, there's this element of having control or maybe not having control and just like barreling down the hill with my feet off the pedals. So here is the mock-up of this image. And I think by giving the viewer that to be able to pull me down the hill is interesting. Okay, so with that, next steps for this project, I've got a lot of production to do. So I'm going to continue creating and printing the hand-drawn positives for all spreads. I'll assemble pop-up spreads, and likely I will recruit some folks to help me with that. I'll be letterpressing some covers and hopefully some colophons, binding the book together or the books together. Hopefully, if I have some time at the end, creating boxes and then creating an install setting for viewing in a gallery space. Thanks for coming, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was so great. And I think people are definitely going to want to come and see the final version. There's just such an amazing level of personal experience and humor in your work. So thank you so much for sharing. And just to clarify for everyone, we will be doing questions for all three residents at a Q&A after all three of them speak. So next up is Brooks Turner. Brooks is an artist, writer, and educator whose recent work engages the history of fascism in Minnesota. So very timely and appropriate work. So Brooks, you're up.
Thanks, Annika. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to the Jerome Foundation for making this possible for all three of us. Thanks to the MCBA, and yeah, to my fellow cohort members. Thanks also for, you know, being there, and it's been awesome so far. Can't wait for our future critiques and whatnot. So I'm gonna show mostly older work and then kind of allude to what I'm doing now. And I'm gonna start with this project, Legends and Myths of Ancient Minnesota, which I made in 2020. It was basically a 2-year project that in October of October 25th, it was this 32 page insert, newspaper insert was mailed out with the Star Tribune to basically all subscribers of the Sunday paper in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And the project was also on display at the Weisman Art Museum. 5,000 copies were stacked there as a kind of like monolithic sculpture, but one that could slowly be eroded. And this project, which pretty much all of my work has been about since 2018, has been a research practice and the kind of investigation of the aesthetic manifestation of American fascism, looking in particular at the Silver Legion of America, which was an American Nazi organization founded by William Dudley Pelley in 1933, the day after Hitler became chancellor. Prior to 33, Pelly's also on the cover of the magazine on the right here, but he was also a screenwriter, lived in Los Angeles and worked in Hollywood, and published a kind of like Aryan occultist magazine, which is pictured on the left, the New Liberator. The one on the right, the Weekly Liberation, was his organ of the Silver Legion of America, and it was first published in 34, but most issues were published 38 to 40. They had a run where they were publishing every week. And so I became interested in this because Boris Oykerman, who's a curator at the Weizmann that I worked with on this project, had asked me after I had a studio visit with him in 2018 if I knew about any histories of fascism in Minnesota. And I didn't. So I started kind of like researching and digging around, and found out about the Silver Legion and started visiting the Minnesota Historical Society and going through the archives there, and was surprised to find like a little over 100 magazines of the Weekly Liberation at the Minnesota Historical Society. It turns out that the Minnesota Historical Society actually subscribed to the magazine when it was being released in 38 and 39, and it, because of that, is the second largest holder of liberation magazines in the U.S., only after the New York Public Library. And so that in and of itself was pretty disturbing. But beyond that, there was also this depth, I guess, breadth and depth of history of documentation of resistance to fascism, resistance to the Silver Legion in Minnesota by Jewish organizations as well as unions. And so as I kind of researched, I became interested in two different things. One, how through the Silver Legion, I was led into this kind of aesthetic definition of fascism, that fascism presents through aesthetics, and that those aesthetics are particularly American. And so I chose the cover on the left because of the American eagle, the bald eagle in it. But so some of my first collages, then I primarily make collages and do digital drawings throughout this project, but my first collages were these collections of all of the symbols that I encountered in each magazine as I read them. So the one on the left, the New Liberator, is every symbol in every New Liberator magazine. And I was actually able to access that magazine not through the Minnesota Historical Society, but through a digital archive that some occultist, someone who specializes in occultisms, put together. But nonetheless, it was really fascinating to me that, you know, there were these imagery, there was this imagery that were called pirates, and then as well as, you know, the eagle, and then other things that kind of allude to an Orientalist view on Asia, well, specifically Asia, but also the Middle East, North Africa. And then also these kind of vaguely menacing images, like you have this guy kind of pointing down here in the bottom left corner. And then the one on the right is from the Liberation, and it's much more overtly Nazi in that, you know, there are repeated uses of Hitler's image. Mussolini appears at times, and then also representations of stereotypes of Jews throughout the magazine, and sort of like presented as villains. And then also there's this other weird thing of images of Christ, but sort of acting militantly, and that the scourge, that, you know, there's one passage in the Bible where Jesus uses the scourge to drive tax collectors out of the temple, and the Silver Legion chose that emblem as their or chose that the scourge as their emblem because of that story. And so, making this newspaper, I sort of started to see it as an immediate connection to the events of the present. And so I incorporated, it was all things from the past, but there were times where I used it in such a way that I wanted it to feel like it was in the present. And an example of that is this excerpt on the left that talks about how the silver shirts are going to restore America, which is just strikingly similar to the slogan of Make America Great Again. And so, and then the piece on the left is a memo of the Jewish Anti-Defamation Council, because they organized in direct response in 1938 to the rise of the Silver Legion of America in Minnesota, and basically recruited Jews to conduct spying missions, to do reconnaissance on the Silver Legion. And then it was hugely in part of those efforts that the Silver Legion ended up being quashed in Minnesota. And so this is, in response to kind of like being interested in this narrative and history, I started to combine digital drawings with these documents. So the text about restoring America from the previous page became this full broadsheet, or became part of this full broadsheet text with a digital drawing of, there was actually a representation of an oral history report of a group of Jewish professionals that banded together and trained with bats and brass knuckles, and supposedly raided a series of Silver Legion meetings with balaclavas and bats and brass knuckles, with stars of David's on their chest, according to the narrative. And then the drawing on the right is a collage or a digital drawing that kind of like, to me, depicted a reconnaissance effort, and then the text behind it is so there's a document, I think it's like 50 pages long, in the Minnesota Historical Society that was assembled by the Jewish Anti-Defamation Council, that is a list of every known or suspected fascist in Minnesota with their affiliation and address. And there's hundreds of names on the list. And so while I was working on that newspaper, I was also making other sort of like digital paintings. And I started playing around with having them printed onto satin, because to me, satin was the most fascist fabric I could think of, and perhaps also the most fascist fabric I had access to. But and so this piece is a depiction of various various aspects of the Silver Legion, as well as people in Minnesota history who supported that. So you have Republican Governor Harold Stassen in the foreground. You have Ray P. Chase, who distributed propaganda and fake news about communists, which was really coded language for Jews taking over Minnesota government. You have George Belden, who was one of the wealthiest men in America at the time, and suspected of significantly funding the Silver Legion of America. You have Hjalmar Peterson, who basically is the reason why the Farmer Labor Party failed in Minnesota, or at least a contributing factor. You have Jay Hormel, who also funded and attended Silver Legion meetings, and he was president of Hormel Industries. Roy Zachary was a lieutenant for the Silver Legion who came to Minnesota multiple times and held rallies attended by hundreds of people. Pele's way in the background. And then Esther Jerebeck was the head of accessions at the Minnesota Historical Society. And she also appeared on a couple different lists of known contacts of the Silver Legion in Minnesota. And so this printing on fabric, liked the way that my newspaper could reach so many people and how it kind of existed. I saw it as existing as a kind of footnote to the present, that the content in the newspaper was immediately relevant to, the rise of Trumpian fascism in America. And so, but I also wanted a way that those pages could survive, because obviously newspaper is non-archival and pretty fragile. And so I started printing the pages of the newspaper as these 30 by 60 inch satin draperies. And then I've just put grommets in them to kind of make them easy to hang. And so that's what this series is. And you can see like the one on the right here is the same as, well, it's a similar, it uses the same elements as the newspaper page that I had showed before, but the other two text heavy ones are identical. Here on the left too it's identical to, actually all three of these are identical to what appeared in the newspaper that was mailed out, the Star Tribune. Another thing that the Jewish Anti-Defamation Council had uncovered in Minnesota was police complicity in Silver Legion activities, as well as acting as recruitment, and the use of the Nankin Inn, which was a kind of Orientalist Pan-Asian restaurant in Minneapolis. But they were, the Silver Legion was active there, used it regularly for meetings. So after the January 6th insurrection, I was going through some of my documents that I had scanned, and found this one image, the cover of a Liberation magazine from January 14th, 1939. So, 82 years earlier, almost exactly. And the cover said, "Will it take civil war to end Jew control?" And it struck me how similar that question was to essentially the actions of insurrectionists, storming the Capitol. So I made this digital drawing of the insurrection and paired it with this cover as a kind of extension. And this is the only time that I've really pushed that immediate relationship between past and present through imagery. And it still feels like something I'm thinking about and might come back to at some point, maybe in the project I'm working on now. I still have about 2,000 newspapers in my basement, and I've wanted to, for a long time, take these newspapers and make paper out of them. And that was really what motivated me to apply for this grant. And so what I've been doing with my time as a resident so far is to experiment with figuring out what or how to make paper from these newspapers. And so I've kind of finally in the last few weeks figured out how to take the newspapers and turn them into the type of paper that I want, the thickness I want. And these are just pictures to kind of show what I've made so far. But the next step is then to, well, before I get there, I participated in a faculty exhibition at St. Cloud State University, where I'm an adjunct, and I had this drapery on display, which is about 5.5 feet tall by 8 feet wide or something like that. And I was talking about it, and I was talking about how this is about the history of eugenics in Minnesota, which we also have a history of, and sort of ties into my greater research into fascism in the state. And so while I was talking about the work, as kind of like in a casual artist talk, I can't remember who, but I think it was a student asked if I would ever consider like making my bibliography into an artwork. And you know, I had never considered it that seriously, but ever since they asked that question, I've sort of been obsessed with, or I've been thinking through that as an idea, what it would look like to make an artwork that is a bibliography. Because like my annotated bibliography is 70 pages and counting. And so it's pretty substantial, and something that like I kept returning to with this bibliography is that the structure of it allows me to incorporate things that don't necessarily make sense in a traditional narrative, like or in a logical narrative. And what I mean by that is that you know, for the newspaper project for Legends and Myths of Ancient Minnesota, like the goal was to use primary documents collaged together with digital drawings to tell a story about the rise of fascism in Minnesota and how it was countered by Jews and unions, and then how ultimately like the unions that fought to counter the silver shirts were arrested by the FBI, which is a whole nother story. But and then but then there's all these other tangents that I'm interested in that relate to this history, like the history of eugenics in Minnesota, that don't fit easily into that narrative, but are still important in terms of understanding this, you know, disturbing history of imperialism, of racism and fascism in Minnesota. And then there's like other, so you know, I'm sort of in the process right now of I use InDesign to lay out and plan how all of these pages are going to look once they're bound into I guess I missed a step there, but I should say that my thinking now is that I'm going to take my bibliography and turn it into an illuminated manuscript. I've always wanted to kind of make one. I've been making, you know, little like handmade books since I was a kid. And the idea of being able to make my own paper, and the paper itself have this index to a past artwork and historical research, and then on top of that is an index drawn by hand but designed digitally, that points to documents in archives or to books that I've read. I just got really excited about how, you know, the document, it's like it's a critical document, but also the document points outside of itself. It points to the world, and that it can become like a way of navigating, like that there's information that can be drawn just from this bibliography. And also, like, so this is just, you know, what I've done so far is to figure out laying out the text, and the next step will be to actually translate it by hand, all of the text onto the individual pages, and then start drawing and painting around it. Because even though I do, like, most of the stuff that I'm presenting here is digital, I've been drawing, right? I make drawings in ink as well, which will be the primary medium for this book. And so this page is sort of like, you know, a 2-page spread about my research into eugenics. But something that became interesting to me is that I can also pull in other references into this bibliography, like Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, where in the epilogue, he has this kind of amazing meditation on how fascism, the logical result of fascism, is the introduction of aesthetics into political life, and that communism responds by politicizing art. And so like setting up that polarity and that sense of opposition through the relationship between politics and aesthetics seems really important, especially in an era where, you know, you now have a social media platform operated by Donald Trump, where you can, you know, follow truth or post truths, as if like just because you say something it makes it true, which is, you know, kind of like an aestheticization of fact. And then I compare those things with text that I've encountered or read throughout my research, you know, and then can pull in other references to archives, as well as references to other books that have been foundational in terms of my own thought about imperialism, colonialism, history, things like that. And so I can do things like pair Frantz Fanon's Towards the African Revolution with Pharrell Dobbs' Teamster Politics. Dobbs was a central organizer in forming Union Defense Guards that actively stood up against fascism in Minnesota. Frantz Fanon, of course, is one of the most important post-colonial thinkers and writers, particularly as it relates to systematized racism and colonialism, oppression. So I'm still kind of like playing around with these formats, trying to figure out what things sit next to each other, how they relate, the kind of like abstracted story they tell. And, you know, as I'm kind of like starting to assemble these things, I kind of, there's a way in which I think about the poetry of the juxtaposition, you know, of these two, like, for example, Fanon and Dobbs, as a kind of magic, as like, as recipes for spells or something like that, that I, you know, in reading them and understanding that they aren't purely contained within this artwork, but that they also point to the world, and they point to you know, like books that exist beyond, that are easily accessible in libraries and or ordering online or whatever, that it's a translation of art from this kind of like rarefied object to the world, I guess, which I think is kind of like what magic is in a way, or at least poetically speaking. So yeah, I think that this also, to me, this feels like a more hopeful project in that regard. Yeah, I still have to make a lot of paper, but I really like the process. And I think that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooks. Thank you for sharing all of that and giving us insight into a history of Minnesota many of us are not aware of. So thank you. And finally, last but not least, Leah Willemin is our final book artist resident. Leah is an artist and designer working with craft, technology, and performance. She makes projects that explore the interaction between large-scale systems and individual experience. So Leah, thank you.
Thank you. Just a second. All right. Just a second. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Annika. Thanks, Nicole and Brooks. It's so wonderful to see your presentations and see your work. It's been so great to work with you throughout the fellowship so far, and I can't wait to see the work you come up with. I want to start out also by thanking the Jerome Foundation, as well as all the MCBA staff who've been so supportive throughout the beginning of this fellowship. So my name is Leah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an artist, an educator, and a designer. And I'll start by discussing some of my previous work, especially as it has informed my current practice. Much of my work is deeply research-based. I use time-based media and performance. And I also work between craft, digital media, and digital fabrication. So I use techniques like bookbinding and printmaking alongside code, 3D printing, laser cutting in my work. And I'm interested in bringing these media together in meaningful ways, so deploying the strengths of each process. So to begin with, this is a piece I made that several years ago. And it's a piece exploring the Faribault woolen mill. So at the time, it was the last fully vertically integrated woolen mill in the United States. So that meant that they were taking wool from the sheep to a finished product that someone can buy. And this was a mill with really extensive history. So it had been in the same building since its start, and it had machines that showed just sort of the span of the technology from very early milling machines to contemporary looms, and people who'd worked there for a very long time. So I did a photo series of that, and then I created a book with like layered pages using intaglio and screen printing, demonstrating the some of the history and trying to create a sense of time in this piece of the technology and also the people who work there. Another piece is these lamps that I created actually during a short-term residency at MCBA. So this was bringing in more of my digital technology skills. I was using CNC cut Tyvek to create pressure prints, and that's that knit pattern you see there, and then weaving these into lamps. So I'm interested again in using light quite a bit, and interested in the intersection of traditional craft and things like letterpress, things like weaving and textiles, and referencing those histories as well. So the presence of the hand in something like weaving or these knit patterns, as well as contemporary or digital technologies like CNC cutting and like this polypropylene that I've used for the lampshade. Moving forward, this is a piece that's actually ongoing, and it's called Paperware. So this is a web-generated fold-up wearables. And these can be laser cut, they can be customized and then laser cut. And the files can just be downloaded from the online site. So this is, I'm really interested in working with, again, working with digital fabrication, so laser cutting, working with code, being able to generate these forms and playing with forms that are generated by code, and then bringing them to paper craft and exploring wearables in a low stakes, not precious context, but instead something that's fun and accessible. Something that I often do in my work, and I've been working quite a bit on at MCBA as well, is making my own tools. Working between craft and programming and digital fabrication, I often find that the things I want to do are things I have to develop the workflows and the tools to do. So this is a case where I made my own program to create these customized pieces. And it's something that really continues through my work and has been a big focus of this fellowship at MCBA as well. So this is a piece that, again, brings together laser cutting and the form of the book. I studied quite a bit of bookbinding and printmaking, woodworking in undergrad at Carleton College. And after graduation, I really have started to focus on incorporating digital fabrication and code and robotics. So this is a piece that where I was returning to the form of the book to create narrative and to explore some research-based concepts I've been working with. I did extensive research into the exploring data mining and identity, and examining sort of the intimate process of taking in information. And then also the warping of that process through disinformation, through filter bubbles. So this piece is a laser cut book mounted on a large pedestal. The pieces that are holding up the book are actually mounted to motors, and there's light going through the book to create shadow below it. So throughout the show, very, very slowly, the book itself would warp, and these shadows below the book would warp. As I mentioned before, I often work with time. And so I'm interested in making work that moves not very fast, not in a way that I think often digital technology can be very flashy, can be very immediate, but instead moving so slowly that you might not even notice it. But instead, something that changes maybe the second time you see it, or maybe when you wander by it again during the exhibition. So that slowness is something that I work with often. And then finally, here's a piece. This is called Body Double, and this was a 4 to 6 hour durational performance. So in this piece, again, it was quite heavily research-based. I was working with looking at the algorithmic suggestions on YouTube and sites like YouTube, and the way these can take a person down a rabbit hole, being increasingly extreme in the content that they present. So I like to put my own body in the work, or also examine issues of labor and presence. And so in this piece, I reperformed YouTube videos frame by frame. I reperformed the actions of the person shown in the video and tried to reenact it frame by frame over the course of many hours. The videos were slowed down to accommodate a 3D printer that would capture my own movements along with the movements of the person in the YouTube video and overlay them on top of one another. So for each frame of the video, it would pause and allow the printer to complete a print, delineating my movements juxtaposed against the movements of the person in the YouTube video. This takes quite a while. So the videos would iterate through frame by frame very slowly as I performed them, and had to hold the pose for a very long time. So inch by inch moving through these videos. So again, putting myself in the position of reperforming these videos and creating a very slow durational performance to examine labor and identity and sort of the experience of going through that set of YouTube videos. So again, this also comes back to my practice that includes making my own tools. For this project, I made a program that would capture my movements in real time, also capture the movements of the person in the YouTube video, and then send that information to a 3D printer for real-time printing. Although a 3D printer is still working in digital fabrication, it's still a digital process, I am very interested in bringing the data and digital forms into material structures. So creating something tangible, something material, and these sculptural forms were what resulted from that. So I'll move on to my current work in the Jerome Fellowship, where I'm focusing on the peatlands of Minnesota. So just to give you some background, and again, this project has been very research-based for me, like other projects where I was researching things like misinformation and filter bubbles, or something like the Faribault woolen mill. I've started by diving really deep and understanding this local ecology. So this is a picture of the Satin bog in northern Minnesota. And I visited there recently. The Satin bog is actually a real destination for birders. It's a really wonderful place where one can visit in the winter and see pretty unique overwintering birds. So just to orient you to what I'm talking about with peat bogs, Minnesota has over 6 million acres of peatland. That's more than any state except for Alaska. So a peatland, what is a peatland? Peatlands form in poorly drained lowlands where the water table is nearly at the surface of the soil. So these rivers aren't running through it, but instead it's water that's sitting right aligned with the surface of the soil. So the plant matter in a peat bog is waterlogged. That means it doesn't have access to oxygen. And what that means is that these peatlands, the organic matter in them decomposes very, very slowly. It's kind of in a stasis. And it builds up and creates this mass of organic matter. And it's a unique ecosystem. So there's sort of a delicate balance of the water table as it sits right at the edge of the surface. Hummocks that grow sort of above the water table, and often black spruce that grow around there. And then what is primarily sphagnum moss and some other plants that make up the plants that can grow in these bogs, and then also become this decaying organic matter that isn't really decaying. It decays only very, very slowly. So among the bogs or the peatlands in Minnesota is the Marcel experimental forest. This is up north of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And this is a place where the Forest Service conducts really unique research into peat bogs. And I've connected with them, and for this project, we'll be visiting there a couple times and working with them to learn more about their research there, as well as access data from this research in particular. So part of my project will be to work, again, use programming, use digital fabrication, and work with data and to create books that explore narratives around these peatlands. And this, we're so lucky to have in Minnesota this facility where they have decades of climate information and climate data about these bogs, and they also have this research ongoing. So each of these little tents that you see in the image is a place where they've sectioned off a part of the bog and are examining the effects of climate change on peatlands. So I'll also, be highlighting some of that research in my piece. So why is this important? Other than the fact that it's this really unique ecosystem. Only 3% of land on Earth is peatland, but peat stores twice the carbon of all the world's forests. So, and in addition, these ecosystems also host many migratory birds and unique plant species, including orchids. So peat bogs exist as these really critical carbon sinks. However, when they're disturbed or drained, they decompose, and they release greenhouse gases. So in Minnesota, because there's so much peatland in Minnesota, they are these unique sites where they're pretty accessible to people and people are around them. Whereas much boreal peatland is in, Alaska, where it's pretty remote. Here, people interact with it quite a bit, whether that is to go appreciate birds or to do scientific research or to drain it and create farmland or otherwise alter the land. So this is this site of complex human interactions, and I'm interested in exploring how people interact with these sites and sort of exploring some of these narratives around the value and the uses and the history and futures of these peat bogs. Here's another bog in Minnesota. This is the Big Bog. And this is also a site where there's been, disturbance to the bog as well, which releases massive amounts of greenhouse gases. So in researching these bogs, I've been thinking about the volume of them. What is underneath the bog, the mass that creates these ecosystems and that stores all this carbon. And so I've been working with 3D scanning, using a handheld scanner where I can move around a space and capture the terrain. And in trying to convey that volume and a sense of what is not seen. These ecosystems themselves are often overlooked. They're not loud. It's easy to drive past them. And also they capture, and under the ground is this really critical carbon, and that's critical to keep inside the ground. So I've been thinking about that sense of volume and creating representing that volumetric space in my work. And then also thinking more metaphorically about what is not seen and representing what is not seen, whether that's the sort of the microstructure and the details of the ecology, whether that's the narratives that don't come out through data as I use it, right? There's a lot of quantitative data that I'm looking at, but there's also a lot of qualitative data or experience and narrative that I want to highlight in this work. And so thinking about that volume and capturing that through 3D scanning. And so here are a couple images of just preliminary scans. These are of local snow. You can see they're quite imprecise. So without a very fancy scanner, the scans are often pretty imprecise because I'm walking around the space and capturing what the scanner can see of my movements. And can see of the space from my movements. So again, I'm thinking about performance and really embracing that imperfection and understanding that as a record of my own movements, as a record of my own experience in this space. And, not as a detriment, but rather as something that speaks to my own experience in that space and to the imperfections in something like this data capture and digitization. So as I mentioned, a lot of my work also starts to, I end up building tools for myself. So I've set out to, and this is part of what I proposed for the fellowship, is a two-part project where I'm creating creating tools to use digital processes with traditional bookbinding tools and processes. So bringing them together and creating tools and workflows to do that. And then creating research-based work using data and that explores data and ecology and makes use of that tool. So as part of this sort of two-pronged proposal for this fellowship, I've started out working with 3D printing and paper making, and taking these scans and trying to create three-dimensional paper sheets from these scans. So I started by learning how to make paper, and thanks to Anna Haglin for a lot of support on that. So just learning how to create paper sheets, and a little bit of background on this. It's involved a lot of trial and error for me, but paper is created by beating paper pulp into a pretty smooth slurry. And then here's a vat. So this is showing the beater, like kind of tearing the paper pulp into smoothly distributed fiber. And then here's a vat of that pulp that's suspended in a vat. Now, traditionally, one would use a screen, as shown on the second table back there, a flat screen, put it under this paper pulp and pull it up to create a flat sheet of paper. What I've been working with is taking my 3D scans, 3D printing them into contoured pieces I'll come back here. So 3D printing them into contoured meshes. So these have holes, these on the right, these pieces have holes through them so that water can drip through them, so that they behave like a screen or a mesh. And then using those to dip under my paper pulp and pull it up and have the paper pulp stick to that surface to create a thin, translucent, three-dimensional sheet of paper. This is, again, has involved a lot of trial and error. And I finally gotten to a point where I am getting successful thin translucent sheets from this process. So next steps for this are going to be creating a workflow, and a well-documented workflow, as well as some software tools, so that I or other people can drop in a 3D file, any kind of 3D contour, and then it will generate a mold that can be used to create paper. Something else I've been experimenting with is creating watermarks from some digital files. So 3D printing these watermarks, or 3D printing these screens that create watermarks, and then making paper from that. And my final goal will be to combine those two so that I can create three-dimensional paper with watermarks embedded in them. Shown here is a watermark of the cellular structure of sphagnum moss, which is, again, one of those plants that makes up quite a bit of a peat bog. So just to show in some more detail, these are these molds that I've been creating. And then this is a sheet of paper that I created using that mold. And here's some of that process. I've experimented with 2-part molds, as well as just 1-part molds, just the flat mold mesh. And so this is an example of them drying. So it, once I pull the paper through, it's quite wet, and then it has to sit and dry. So for looking towards the show, and what I'm working on now is creating some large scale books using these processes. So this is a model, and this is a sculptural book that on the right is the fully closed book, and on the left is that book unfolded. So it stacks up and then it unfolds into this terrain, and it's all created of sort of boxes of paper. So I'm planning on creating 2 of these. One taking the metaphor of a book and that depth, again, that like volume and depth, and exploring these ecosystems through time. So looking at climate futures and also looking back, using a lot of that data that's been collected over decades and exploring experiences and change in these ecosystems through time. The other book, I'll be looking at literally these ecosystems through space. So exploring the literal depth in the soil, examining the, that critical water level and the way that that can change in the case like drought, and the effect that that might have on these ecosystems and their ability to store carbon. So examining that depth. For these books, I'll also be creating a digital projection component. So I've been working with rear projection as well as front projection to create additional imagery. So these books will have their own imagery printed in them and watermarked in them. And also will have projections that are responsive to the viewers paging through them and potentially to real-time changes in the environment. So these are some examples of that rear projection of, again, of that sphagnum moss pattern onto the paper. And again, I'm really interested in creating something that is not so flashy as projection can often end up being, but instead, evocative and something that feels richly textured. As I'm working with these books, I've set out some design goals for myself. I want this project to reward slow observation, as I mentioned before, be something that changes over time quite slowly. This is not intended to be a didactic project, so it is not a science fair project. Instead, I wanted to encourage introspection, hone attention, and the sense of attention to the books that is similar to the sense of attention that highlights the what is not seen of a bog. So bringing experiential and evocative sense to these books rather than having it be really didactic or science fair. I wanted to engage knowing at non-human time and spatial scales. So for the 2 different books, I want to speak to geologic time, again, that real slowness and bringing the viewer into having a sense of that slowness. And also scales like microscopic scale, looking at cellular structures, and also geologic scale. So again, I'm interested in honing the viewer's attention to very different time scales and spatial scales than what a person might normally be used to on a day-to-day basis. I'm presenting a critical approach to quantification in data sources, and that doesn't mean that I am criticizing data or quantification. These are really, really crucial research that is being done into these bogs, but instead examining, again, that what is not said and understanding sort of the richness of these spaces, not only for scientific research, but also for them in themselves and for the creatures that live there, and for people's experiences and stories around these spaces. And then exploring the complementary affordances of digital and physical storytelling. Again, bringing these things together and developing workflows to bring these things together for interactive pieces that feel really rich, and that stand alone as well, and that have layered imagery and speak to the strength of paper making and bookbinding as a craft. So finally, here's some more images. This is of that overall book with projection onto it. And then this is of some more of that book demonstrating the watermark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. That was fascinating. And I just think your intersection between craft and the digital space is just so unique and really tells stories about science and our environment in such a unique way. So thank you so much. Now, if anyone else has any questions, please put them into the chat and we will have our Q&A portion. We have a couple questions to start. So the first question is for Nicole, and that question was, how in what way what do you mean by when you say that your work is research driven, was the question.
Yeah, so in my past work, I was very much so looking into the industrial agricultural system and then also researching the politicization of women's bodies. So I would say that in the past, my work has been more research oriented in terms of reading a lot of research articles or watching a lot of documentaries and then producing imagery from that. I would say for this project, the research that I've done has been more so looking at old photo albums or just thinking about my experiences as a child experiencing my parents' divorce and how that impacted us growing up. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. Thank you. Yeah, that's really, I feel like all of your work is investigating such different things, but you all have a significant amount of research in different ways as part of your process, which was really, I think, interesting to hear about. The next question is for Brooks. The question was, how would somebody be able to see and how could they get a copy of your newspaper?
You can email me and I'd be happy. I will drop off a newspaper to anyone who lives in the Twin Cities, or else, can meet in the Twin Cities. And if you live outside of the Twin Cities, I'll mail you one. So my email is jbrooksturner@gmail.com. So yeah, shoot me an email and I'm happy to send.
Thank you, Brooks. I just put that email into the chat for everyone. Okay, the next question is for Leah. So the question is, do you think bringing digital technology into crafting will make traditional craft more relevant to young people who might not otherwise be interested?
Oh, that's a tough one. And that's a big question. I also teach at MCAD and I love teaching and I think a lot about these questions. I think, I almost think it's the other way around. I think I currently am teaching an introduction to sculpture class, and I'm teaching students who have a great deal of experience doing illustration and digital illustration, and starting to teach them woodworking and working with metal is, it's such a shift, and it's really great to see them starting to think about how do you work with matter and what is the experience of actually working with material and creating really compelling sort of experiences with material and in space. And I think that's something that really drew me to working with craft, working with printmaking, now working with paper making. And I don't think I could do the digital fabrication and programming work I do without an understanding, matter in space and moving in space, right? Coming at it from a performance aspect too. So I think for me, they're so integral to each other, and it's really critical to have both. And for students who haven't experienced that like craft yet. I think it's, you know, whether it's through sort of bringing them together and creating like a, you know, hybrid workflows, or however they can, you know, understanding materiality is really critical for digital or craft-based work.
Thanks, Leah. My question is almost it makes me think, like, what is the opposite reaction? Like, have more older traditional crafters or people who are more traditionally based artists in craft had any like particular reactions when seeing your combination and intersection between the digital and craft?
You know, that's a great question. And I think that's something that I would love to have conversations with, you know, anyone watching or other people really working, particularly with paper making. I've generally had pretty positive reactions. And I think, you know, part of that, and part of what I really work hard to do is to integrate a sincere understanding of the craft that I'm working with. You know, there's so much nuance to something like paper making that I'm just learning and understanding, well, what makes compelling paper? What to a paper maker is really interesting and innovative, or makes use of the material in a way that sort of honors the material. So that's something that I really work hard to do, and something that I would love to have ongoing conversations with people at MCBA as well. And I think that's something that is so wonderful about being able to do this fellowship as well.
Thanks, Leah. The next question is for Brooks. They said amazing presentation, and I am curious, why is satin the most fascist fabric?
Well, I guess I should say, like, particularly the satin that I'm printing on is polyester satin. And I think that it's got this like sheen to it that, you know, shimmers and like kind of like has this feel to it, like it's got like, I don't know, regal, like a regal quality, but really it's just, you know, plastic. And it's sort of, I don't know, I guess like gross in that regard. I don't know. It's just, it's really just like a gut aesthetic response, I guess, to the satin.
Thanks. I was wondering that too, Brooks, and that makes more sense to me. The next question is for Nicole. Do you think nostalgia can be a universal experience, even though it is rooted in a personal experience?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think one of the things that I am thinking about in this project is that crossover between, you know, what I'm kind of looking at personally and then producing imagery around, and how that could cross over with someone else's experience. So I think that there is some overlap. I don't know that everyone can have one universal experience of any given event, but I do feel that just in conversations I've had with people who have also experienced divorce or growing up in a household with that happening, they've really responded well to the work and saying things like, oh my gosh, I can so relate to that, or you know, this really resonated with me. So hopefully there's a little bit of that happening, but I can't speak for all nostalgia, I guess.
Thanks, Nicole. And because you were talking about and had that question about research, I also know what you didn't talk about exactly, how much research you've done just on how to construct the actual pop-ups. So I'm wondering, you know, when you're doing the research on the pop-ups, are you seeing examples and you're like, oh, I can incorporate it into this photographic reference I have, or that's perfect for the French fries that I already know I want to make a pop-up, or does it go the other way around where you're seeing examples of pop-ups and how to construct them and you're like, oh, I can adapt that into French fries? Or is it both?
Yeah, no, that's another excellent question. So it's a mix of both. I brought a reference book. So this is called Pop-Up Design and Paper Mechanics. This has been really helpful. You can see I've just like, annotated a ton. I would say it's some of both. I had a little bit of knowledge as to some of the pop-ups I wanted to make, but I didn't necessarily know how to build them. So when researching and constructing, sometimes I would have an image that I would find a pop-up for, and then I'd be able to produce based around that. So like you were saying with the French fries, there was a pop-up in the book. It's like a very standard pop-up mechanism. And I was like, that's going to be French fries. Whereas for some other of my images, it was more like I would find a pop-up that was interesting to make, and then I would make the structure and then attach onto it some things that I might want to see. So for example, there's a lot of different ways you can like pull a pull tab and have like an arm move. And instead of, making it into literal arms, I was like, what else could I use that for? And I ended up making a pull tab with a kite that rotates as you pull the tab. So definitely a mix of both. And it's been really rewarding to play around with all of those different types of structures and learning so much from that.
Thank you, Nicole. The next question is for Brooks. How do you consider the potential for inadvertently glorifying fascist imagery in your work?
Yeah, I've been asked that before. And it's definitely something that's like, I'm always thinking about. I think that the important thing is, okay, so I have two responses. One, when we look at history, particularly the Silver Legion in Minnesota, one of the early efforts was to give zero press to them because of this fear of inadvertently bolstering their recruitment. And that strategy essentially lasted until 1936. However, during that time period, the Silver Legion grew to, according to the Silver Legion, which granted is not necessarily a great measure of truth, that there were thousands of members in Minnesota. So they said like 6,000 members and tens of thousands of supporters. But like then when you look at the documents that the Jewish Anti-Defamation Council collected, that is not necessarily far from the truth. Certainly, it was a large enough population and a big enough, it had a big enough effect on donors that they were able to, that Minnesota became one of the largest recruiting states for the Silver Legion of Minnesota. And so that idea of ignoring it just does not work. Like this has happened over and over and over again. When fascism is ignored, it actively supports the propagation of it. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is context. And that's like a huge aspect of every artwork that I make, is that it's embedded with context. I mean, the other thing too is that, like, if I guess like I can't be responsible. I don't think any of us can be responsible for somebody looking at a symbol and being like, oh, wow, I like that. Like, I'm going to invest in it. What we have to be responsible for is creating a world in which those symbols, those ideologies are demonized the minute that they are spoken. And so the context that I create around my artwork is pretty intentional in saying, like, this is bad, this is happening now, and like, if we don't talk about it, we're just going to help it get worse. And talking about it, I think, is the same as visualizing it in some ways.
Thanks, Brooks. The next question is for Nicole. They said, I love the pop-ups, so fun. What role does fun or whimsy play in your work?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I do feel like sometimes I'm maybe unpacking some heavier ideas, but at the same time I'm having fun, or yeah, exploring this like whimsical idea of this pop-up paper figure. I definitely feel like in my more recent work, I've really embraced that idea of fun or whimsy. And I know that I've gotten responses too surrounding humor and how people, you know, think that it is funny, which I totally agree with that response and understand that some of my work does translate that way too. So I would say, yeah, I'm definitely thinking about it a little bit when I'm making, just because it's such a natural part of the process, to just be constructing these things and seeing these new ideas realize and pop out at you. Yeah, there's kind of no way around it. It's just fun.
Thanks, Nicole. If there are any last second questions as we get to the end, please put them in now. But also thank you everyone for joining us to hear from these three artists. I'm just continue to be so amazed at how much work they have made thus far into their residency. And I'm very excited for when we will be able to put up their exhibition in the fall and for everyone to see that. And if anyone is interested for our 2022 Jerome Partnership Cycle, it will be our Jerome Mentorship Series, not the residency. So it'll be for people who are not necessarily practicing book artists to learn more about the book arts. So please share the word that we will be opening that application cycle this June. And again, if there are any last questions, please put them in now. Otherwise, sharing in the chat is the website link for the Jerome residency, so you can follow along and see more information on MCBA's website, and a link where you can donate to MCBA to continue to support amazing artists like Brooks, Nicole, and Leah. So thank you everyone for joining us. And you guys are getting some great feedback in the chat, so take a look at that, guys. There's been a lot of great comments about your talks. Okay.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you all.
Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I am going to end the meeting, but thank you everyone so much for joining. And again, thank you to our three artists for sharing about their work. And please do continue to follow along on their residency journey. Thank you, everyone. Bye.